Good morning and welcome to Whitney in the Wild. I am Whitney Mendoza, managing partner with Liger Partners and your host for the morning. And I am joined by John Saunders. He is author and coach, but also spent more than 2 decades as a Wall Street senior vice president. You're a team leader, award-winning sales executive. John, good morning. Thanks for being here with me this morning.
Good morning, Whitney. Thanks for having me on.
So we were talking before the show because I thought a perfect starting off point for our conversation this morning was really something that I found on your site, which also really inspired the title for this morning. But tell us a story about the elephant.
Sure. There's many of you probably seen this picture or this image. It's an elephant tethered to a small post, a full-grown elephant that weighs 4,000 to 6,000 pounds. And you wonder, why is it just standing there and doesn't just walk away? And the reason they don't is because since they were a baby elephant, they've been tethered to that post. So they've been conditioned, they've been taught that this is where I have to stand and where I'm stuck until my leader tells me otherwise. And I think it's a really great metaphor for how leadership can or cannot impact their team and how you help your team unleash or not unleash their gifts. And I just think it's a really interesting metaphor for that because we can have that same impact as leaders. And part of what I try to do is help people create that environment where they do unleash the team and don't make them feel tethered to that post.
Yeah. And I love that. I saw it and I was like, oh, that's fantastic. Because it's almost imaginary, right? It's almost these imaginary limits that we put on ourselves. So I love that lead in. John, given that, how did you know that your services are really what the world needed? Like, how did you get involved in leadership and coaching and helping people kind of live outside of that tether, if you will?
I have this mindset I've just always had of, gosh, how do I figure out what we're doing? How do we make it better? And maybe if I could help others, that would be fantastic. And I've just always had that mindset from playing sports and my whole life. But fast forwarding into my career, what I found was, especially as a leader on Wall Street, very competitive environment where, literally we're tasked with raising my final year goal, I think, was around $4 billion for my team to raise. It takes a fair amount of time and energy to get that done. And what I found through some different reorgs and having different people coming on and off my team over the years was that as a leader, you're inextricably tied to leading change. The industry is changing, the environment is changing, the economy is changing, and you have to be able to pivot on a short notice. But what I also found is at the same time, change is what people probably fear the most. And so my whole concept is if you can help people think in this serial innovation, or what I like to call optimizer mindset, constant incremental change, it gives them, one, the safe feeling of being able to deal with change because they're small steps, you're taking on big steps. And as they continue to do that, I have them share that with the team. Others see it happening. They think of different ideas, raise up the bar for, share it back with the team. And real example, someone takes an idea, I challenge them to find a better way to do what it is they're doing. And by the way, you have to help them find it. If you impose it upon them, that's not always the best path forward. But if they can take the time, say 30, 60, 90 days to figure out a new process, idea, service, some way to execute, and then share it with the team, everyone else now can start at that sort of 90-day starting point. And so it becomes this environment where everybody raises up together and change just becomes part of the culture as opposed to something, oh man, that we have to fear and be afraid of. And I've just found that to be really powerful. And small changes can lead into very big results over time.
Mm-hmm. So what did you see through the pandemic where we had this very sudden change and one that most of us, I would say, have never experienced before? We were just kind of thrown into this different world. What did you see? And, maybe if you've got a story of how someone took that and did something amazing with it, right? Like we saw so many positive stories come out of this as well, of people looking at it and really kind of taking the time to either learn a new skill or grow on themselves or work on their business. So what did you see during that time?
Well, I think personally speaking, my favorite part would be writing a book. I took this chance to take the time to do that. But when I think about people that I've worked with over the years and coached and been a leader to, one of my favorite examples is a woman, Nicole, and sales executive, incredibly successful, pandemic hits. Now these folks that were traveling salespeople, always meeting face to face, suddenly are staring at a Zoom screen. And it paralyzed a lot of people. Holy, this is going to pass. I'll be gone in a month or two. I'm just going to kind of bide my time until I can move on. And Nicole dove straight in and just figured it out. And her mindset is just one of constant incremental change, which is great. And how do I improve my circumstance? And then it was taking her ability and spreading it or leveraging it across the team. So she began doing training sessions for others and letting them sit in on her calls to see, how is this working? Because for many, it was, it sounds subtle, but face-to-face meetings as a salesperson, which I was for many, many years, versus Zoom are just very different. Right. And she looked at the positives and said, now I'm meeting with this person. I'm kind of in their house and getting to see what's on their bookshelves and pictures of their kids. And it actually gave her a chance to get to know her clients better and dig in deeper and be far more efficient, which was fascinating. And so just really embraced the change and then helped others follow suit.
Yeah. Something else that you talk about is creating that safe environment for teams as well. And I feel like that was also really put to the test during this, right? Like as a leader, you had people coming to you asking, what are we going to do? When are we going to return to the office? What do the safety protocols look like? And I would say probably a lot of leaders weren't really sure of that answer. Again, because a lot of them had not experienced something like this. Again, what did you see there? And then if there are some tips for leaders as we start to open back up and go back in the office to create that safe environment.
All right. Any kind of change is going to induce an emotional charge, fear, loss, uncertainty, shame. And we all react to that or deal with that very differently. And I don't think there's a lot of tools out there to teach how to create safety or psychological safety in the environment. That's something I spend time working with people on, because there's no sort of Wikipedia page for that, if you will, and with a tremendous amount of resources. So my thinking is, as a leader, your first job is to build trust and build relationships with your team. If that's not there, you're always going to be tied to leading change. People don't want to necessarily face change because of the emotional charge. So anchor it in trust, build a relationship, get feedback from folks, take action from it, give them credit. I mean, simple little tasks like that, and certainly being transparent to the degree you can be. And I'll share a quick story with you if I could.
Yes.
So I had to do a reorg a few years ago. I had a gentleman leave my team, and I had to make a decision. Should I replace him, or I could do a bit of a reorg myself and sort of, it was a sales region, give part of the regions to the adjacent folks. And I did a bunch of research, interviewed people. I didn't find anyone I loved. And so I got the approval to collapse the region, but it was going to be a massive change to one gentleman in particular who'd been with the firm for 20 something years. And, he was going to go from having worked all these years to not having to do a lot of overnights to suddenly doing a bunch of overnights again. So I reached out to him and I said, his name was Dave. I said, Dave, I'm thinking about reorging, it was Virginia in this case, the state of Virginia, which is, you might know, is doesn't seem that big, but it's a really massive piece of dirt, especially for a traveling salesperson. And I called him up and I said, Dave, I'm thinking about not replacing the gentleman that just left. I'd love to get your feedback on how we might restructure the state if, there was no one living down in the Richmond area. And he about fell out of his chair because he had never been approached with this type of business strategy question before. And he said, man, can I get 3 or 4 days and think about it? Sure. So we meet at a Starbucks, whatever, a few days later. He comes back to me with a business plan that looked 70-ish, 80% like what I had already designed. But guess whose business plan this now was?
It's his.
It's his. Mm-hmm. And so there's radical change. It was disrupting his apple cart. And we did do some things to sort of give him some more prestige, bigger budget. We added some resources to his team, things like this, which was necessary, but, made him feel better about it too. But now this new business plan was his. So instead of me coming to him and saying, hey, Whitney, here's the new deal, take it or leave it, which sometimes is the case, and particularly in Wall Street, we had a very collaborative discussion around it. He comes in, he dives in head first, has an amazing 1.5, 2-year run, and ends up getting promoted.
Wow.
Now let's pretend I took the exact opposite approach and said, Dave, here's your deal, take it or leave it. What happens? He goes to his peers and says, my boss is a jerk. He dumped this thing in my lap. I mean, so talk about not just building trust in a relationship, but your actions speak louder than words. And that was one of my favorite examples.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I love how you spoke on kind of leading them to the water in a sense, right? Like presenting the problem, but kind of helping them along the way, giving little uh, peanuts, if we will, back to our elephant analogy of like, oh, really, you can step away from that post and make your own decisions. Where do you feel like the feedback loop plays in that?
So such a critical part of the trust relationship building. What it does is it enables people. You're enabling them to say, hey, I can raise my hand and say something. Because guess what? If you're a leader, your team members, they see what's going on. Mm-hmm. This is working. This isn't working. Our clients like it. They don't like it. But if they don't feel enabled to raise their hand and say, hey, Whitney, something's not working here, because they're afraid of the repercussions they're going to get from that, that's bad. And that doesn't mean the problem went away. It just means it's hiding at the water cooler instead of on your desk, right? And the story I like to share there is such a simple one, because the important part about this one is that the bar is low. So I had a remote team long before remote was, the norm.
Cool.
And we did, right? Yeah. Fashionable. Yes. And we did tons of conference calls. I just kind of took the schedule my prior manager had, and seems like we were sort of death by conference call. So I reached out to a guy in the team and said, hey, Brian, I don't feel like we're communicating that well as a team and kind of getting a lot of value out of all this communication we do. What would you do if you were me? And he said, I'd get rid of a bunch of these calls we do. There's some honesty for you.
Yes.
Right. And so I looked at the calendar. I always mapped them out 12 months at a time. And I simply took out the ones that were Memorial Day and pushed it to Tuesday. That was what I did. Labor Day, pushed it to Tuesday. Wherever there was a holiday or a conference, I just pushed it a day and kept it. I just knocked those out. So it knocked out, I think, 15, 17% of the calls or something like that.
Wow.
Sent out a note to the team. Hey, everyone, Brian thinks we have too many calls. So we're going to try a pilot. That's a very important word, by the way, in leading change, pilot, because it sort of invites people into, we're trying something new as opposed to this is a new thing that's, that's happening to you. So I said, Brian thinks we have too many calls. We're going to try a pilot this year with fewer calls. So, and I've been asking people for feedback at this point a bunch as a leader already. And I sent out the note, gave him credit for it. Invites popped off their calendars. Fast forward to the end of the year, Whitney. And I said, last call of the year, I said, hey, everyone, the pilots, we're at the end of the year. Should we go back to the old schedule? And this was, to say the silence was deafening would be an understatement. And guess what? We had a blowout year. And if I had to get something out to them, I could make a one-off call to say, hey, everyone, you need to learn about this or whatever it might be. But how hard was that to do? Mm-hmm. And that really was a turning point where people said, hey, this guy's asking us for our feedback, but he's actually going to, if I come up with a good idea, he's going to do something with it. Mm-hmm. And just a really powerful exercise.
Yeah.
For me to do what I just did, it took longer than it took me probably to tell you that story.
Yeah.
Or it took less time,
I love that word pilot. I've been wanting to find a word besides pivot. It's like you really can do anything for a year. One of the exercise coaches that I see, they say that, you believed in Santa Claus for 8 years, so you can do anything for 30 seconds or a minute. And it's really true. You can make that plan to where, we're going to try this for 6 months or a year, see if it works. It's not written in stone or blood, so we can change it if we tried something and it didn't work. I really like that. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and that's where it took me a while to learn that word. And it's only 5 letters, but man, has it been powerful in driving change initiatives, because it's a softer word that kind of invites people to, hey, we're trying something new. We're all in this together. Let's try to figure it out, as opposed to, here's some change, take it or leave it.
Yeah. So do tell us about your book. You've got an event coming up in May, so I want to be sure that we cover that before our time is over. And you wrote this during the pandemic? Your book?
Yeah, it published right at the end of the year, right at the end of 2020. So I started it late fall-ish in 2019. Wow. And it started out as a paper, actually. And then I kept kind of iterating on it, getting feedback from people. There's feedback again. And wrote a paper. My friend said, make it a series. Another friend said, let me help you fine-tune this to help you get it published somewhere. Did that, took it to a professor at my business school. And he said, I think you have a book here. And I was like, I just want to write a paper. And I said, how do you even write a book? And he introduced me to an author coach, this gentleman, Eric Custer. And he has this 1-year program where you literally get a book published. Of course, you have to hit all these targets, and it's far from a small time commitment, but it was an amazing journey. So the book is really tied to all these things we're talking about. It's called The Optimizer: Building and Leading a Team of Serial Innovators. And it's all about getting people to think in this incremental change mindset, constantly allocating 10, 15% of their time to thinking about doing things differently. And then as a leader, enabling, empowering, and sustaining this mindset through a number of strategies. We talked about a lot about the enabling part. There's certainly pieces to empowering them, which is largely, to me, acting as a trusted advisor as opposed to their boss or manager. And then sustaining it, which really is anchored in putting it in writing, which sounds so simple, but how often do we put in our business plan, I'm going to try this differently this year and see what happens. And then as a leader, putting it in writing to say, all right, I'm going to help lead and manage this experience and be their accountability partner. And it's just been really a lot of fun to get it off the ground and see the interest in it and helping people drive meaningful change, because there's never been a time, I mean, we always need it, but there's never been a time more than now than we do with the pandemic. The event, May 18th and 20th. Thank you for asking. It's a book learning club. So you don't have to have read the book, but me and a partner of mine, who's just a master facilitator, name is Jesse Jacob, we are going to put on a two-piece series on lessons from the book, leadership lessons and stories from the dozens of interviews I did in my 20 plus years on Wall Street and her experience as a culture and innovation consultant. So really excited about that.
Very nice. We did have a question come in from Dakota. He wants to know how you find time to write a book and still get your day-to-day tasks accomplished.
I think the running joke around my household was, between midnight and 5 a.m., you can do whatever you want. It's just, people write. One of the things that was great about this coach was his thing was find your style of writing. Some people like to sit down on a Saturday and just write for 8 hours straight.
Interesting.
I can't do that.
Yeah.
I'm much more of a sort of piece it out and every day just kind of walk down to my office. My kids go to bed around 9 o'clock, sit down in my chair and write and research for 2 or 3 hours. Of course, interviews, had to do those. No one wanted to interview with me at 11 o'clock at night, so I do those during the day. But writing and research, I did, kind of between 9 and midnight, oftentimes later. So it's got to be something you love, right? Because it's not, it probably took me, I figured out probably close to 1,000 hours all in to make it happen.
It feels like it almost becomes its own little side hustle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I went to graduate school in 2015 through 17, MBA program. It was very much felt like that. Every night, just you had to be in your office kind of pecking away at it. But what's great about a book, to Dakota's question, is it's going to be something you love and are passionate about. So,
right.
I mean, that makes it a lot easier.
Right. So if people want to attend the event next month, John, or learn more about you, get the book, where do they go?
Sure. My website is my name with my middle initial in there, John with an H, C Saunders. And then my social media handles are all basically JCS, my initials, _optimizer on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook.
Awesome. Well, John Saunders, thank you so much for joining me this morning on Whitney in the Wild.
What a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Whitney.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in as well. We'll see you tomorrow with a new show.